Brazilian Shirt Name Podcast with Dotun Adebayo and Tim Vickery.
Yeah, that's right. This is the Brazilian Shirt Name Podcast. We've got a very special guest with us, esteemed journalist, football journalist of many years, not least for the Financial Times. He's got a new book out because, Tim, is World Cup fever. Well, it hasn't started yet, but we're about to embrace a World Cup fever.
Well, it has started because his book's been out for 2 days already. So World Cup fever has officially been declared. Just before we get onto this, and I've said before the debt that I owe Mr. Kuper and how myself and so many of us tread in his footsteps. But there's another thing I just want to draw attention to, which was a little FT piece, Financial Times piece that he did recently, that I think is really important about the safety of big cities. I think that that's such an important message at this time, because the rising tide of fascism hates the big city, hates it. And it hates the cosmopolitan thing, hates everyone getting on, hates it, despises it. And we've seen this with London, the attacks of the American far right and many English people who really should know better, joining these attacks on London. Now, I spent a couple of weeks there, kind of July, and if I remember rightly, I never even once launched a crazed knife attack on anyone. I'm almost certain that I would remember doing such a thing. So that little contribution to the debate you made, facts, about the safety of the big city, I think that's a hugely important contribution to the great debate.
Thanks, Tim. Thank you.
So your World Cup journey started in 1990. Although the World Cup journey globally started in 1930. My initial question, I do want to hear about your World Cup journey as well, but just broadly speaking, did I tell you the name of the book? It's called World Cup Fever, and it is pretty much Simon's journey through 9 World Cups, one of the few people in the world who's lucky enough to have visited the last 9 World Cups. It's incredible, actually.
Or unlucky enough. Maybe we can...
Well, that's a very good point, given the context of this book and the last World Cup, let's say, and a couple of others before that. But how different, from what you understand, is the World Cup today and the World Cup that we're about to witness in the USA and Mexico? How different is that from 1930 when it was played out in Uruguay?
I mean, it was a really small event in 1930, even in 1990 when I first went. But in 1930, they have this same problem they have today, that they have to get the host to pay for everything, for the stadiums, and in Uruguay's case, even for bringing the European teams over on a ship. And Uruguay is the only country crazy enough to be willing to do this and builds all these stadiums, I think many of which are with us today. And so it gets to host the World Cup. I think hardly anyone is at many of the matches. People watch Uruguay, but not the visiting teams particularly. And so the World Cup it takes many, many decades before it becomes this monster we know. And the other difference is that even in 1990, when I was first at a World Cup, there were 3 teams from the British Isles, England, Scotland, and the Republic of Ireland. There were 2 teams from the whole of Africa and 2 teams from the whole of Asia. So for about 60 plus years, the World Cup is really a European, Latin American affair. The US is in the first World Cup, but otherwise, the other continents don't get a look in. And I write in the book about Jules Rimet, who serves in World War I. The only picture I have of him in the war, he's with Senegalese, probably African troops from Senegal in a trench, freezing to death on the Western Front. But once he starts to organize the World Cup about a decade later, he doesn't think at all that, African countries, the colonies as they were then, would be allowed to play.
I imagine, though, that, and you've hinted at your first World Cup, Italia 90, famously as well. And the idea, one of the passages in your books, it says that the stadiums were half empty sometimes. It was difficult to get tickets for a lot of the matches. It's very difficult to imagine that because it's such a commercial product now. You know, I personally would go and get tickets for, without being disrespectful to any particular team, but I'd probably go and get a ticket for USA versus Canada, and I don't know why, but just because it's the World Cup, you expect something.
Yeah, shut up. Costa Rica's playing. Shut up. You know.
Wait,
to us all.
I'm sure that will be echoed right across living over the whole world. But how you know, this is just a follow-up question, and I'm sure Tim has got many questions as well. But the follow-up question is, how then did it become this, you know, global commercial behemoth, as it were, from even 1990, which you witnessed in Italy, and say some of the stadiums are half empty? What happened?
Well, I mean, for a start, football takes decades to become popular in most of the world. So even as late as 1990, people in most of Asia, people in North America, they don't care. The World Cup just doesn't exist for most countries in the world. And in fact, I get tickets through a friend, we're students, because he knows the dad of somebody who works for Mars. Mars is left with all these sponsor tickets because Mars's clients don't want to go to the World Cup. You know, if they're Asian, North American, they didn't know it existed. And if they're European, they're terrified of being killed by English hooligans. So you have World Cup soccer taking a long time to spread. TV from the 90s hugely spreads the popularity of soccer. Hooliganism is a cloud, so people don't want to go. And most of the world isn't invited. And the other thing is that I think the World Cup is a story. And like any soap opera, it takes time to get going. And so when you watch, say, Brazil, France, or England, Germany at a World Cup now, or England, Argentina, you care about it because it brings to life all the previous England, Argentinas you watched. And so it's a story of your entire life. It takes you back through history. And those previous matches sort of add to the spice of this one. And obviously in 1930, there's none of that. There's no existing rivalries. There's nothing to look back on. So the World Cup as a story just gets better and better.
There are 13 World Cups in what I now think of as the BK era, before Kuper, and 9 World Cups in the the year of my journalistic lord. Anyway, what's the mother idea behind the book?
Yeah, I like the BK. I mean, the book is partly about what it's like for people unlike us who haven't been to a World Cup, and the actual experience, a kind of travel book for all these World Cups, where you're completely knackered and you meet all these weird people, and you know, as you know, you go to places you'll never go to again. So through the World Cup, I've been to the battlefield at Stalingrad with England fans. I've been to a town in the Amazon, Manaus, which I'm sure I'll never revisit. I almost went mad in the Japanese provinces. So these kinds of stories, and then why it means so much. You know, why is this every new World Cup, I think, becomes the biggest media event in the history of the world, if you judge by number of viewers, number of clicks. Why do we care so much? And then I talk to and watch some of the players, you know, who, and the characters who have marked the World Cups that we know. So Mbappe, Maradona, Sepp Blatter, and then talk about, you know, the rivalries that mean so much to us. Why is it that I can remember great swathes of my first World Cup I saw on TV in 1978? I'm sure both of you can. I'm sure almost everyone who's listening can remember their first World Cup as a child, and not just the football, but where they were, who they watched with, the people long dead who were around you then.
And what the weather was like. I remember very clearly. You know, my first World Cup was actually 66, but I was too young to pay attention. And I was playing Cowboys and Indians in the garden instead. But my older brother, who's a year older than me, he has memories of 66. He was 7 and I was 6. And the difference in that age meant that I had to wait 4 years to actually experience what he was telling me about. Yeah. And by 1970, I was good and ready. I was so ready, you can't believe it. And we all were, because those of us who were around at the time, because Mexico was the first fully televised World Cup.
Yeah, which is why I'm interested in, obviously, you start in 90, because it's your first one. but 70 is the start for large parts of the world that were interested in the World Cup. 70 is the first televised one.
And it's
So
the first modern. It's the first modern one, really. It's the first one that we sort of understood about the countries culturally and otherwise. And what you were saying about that rivalry, football rivalry from a previous time that adds, that comes forward with a new World Cup. That England Brazil match is what stands out for many people, as we may not have had a rivalry before, but we knew that how the English football was respected by the Brazilians, respected by Pele, who seemed to befriend all these icons of English football. It was just a moment in time for us. And every time now England meets Brazil, they did in the, the Japan
2002.
Yes.
2002 World Cup. And I remember that so vividly, I can't tell you. But every time I think back to that 1970, I can't help it. It's part of that moment. I wonder if the footballers themselves have that quite kind of sense of history when they meet a particular team as we do.
Yeah, I was thinking about that because my sense originally was no, because footballers are very much focused on their own careers and they're often at odds with footballers from the past. Footballers from the past often appear on TV as pundits, are jealous of the current generation who earn more. So there's a kind of rivalry as well. But then I was watching Ghana, Uruguay in 2022 in Qatar, and you see Ghana losing 2-0, but if they keep it at that, Uruguay are knocked out as well. And so the Ghanaians fight like lions to keep it to 2-0. They lose, but they take Uruguay out with them. And why did they care? And why did the whole nation of Ghana care, but even the players? Because of Uruguay 2010. Yeah. So I think it does register to some degree. And, when Holland played Germany, or not anymore, but when there was a rivalry, because rivalries also live and die. But in 88, when Holland played Germany, the players who played then at the Euro, they remembered watching in 1974. Now that rivalry is dead, and there's a new rivalry coming up, France-Argentina, based on the very vitriolic World Cup final, and then also Enzo Hernandez having this racist song about the French team on the Argentinian bus. So that, I think, is the newest rivalry in global football.
We did one with Jonathan Wilson, the wonderful Jonathan Wilson, has a history of the World Cup book out, which I think complements yours wonderfully. Because there's less of the first person than there is in yours. But one point that Jonathan Wilson made, and he thinks that this transcends dates, cultures, anything, is that the thing that really struck him is that during the course of the tournament, as the tournament wore on, so many of the players kind of maybe secretly were quite happy to get knocked out because they were homesick.
Yeah, I say this as well, that once you've done enough and you can go home and the crowds will welcome you. So Senegal 2002 is an example. I think they got to the quarters. They were unlikely to go further. They'd totally done enough. It's just horrible being in a World Cup for players because you're locked in this room. You have to think about football all day, which a lot of them don't really like. Many footballers are not that enamored by football. You can't escape. You can't enjoy, the upsides of being a footballer. And the pressure is intense. If I get knocked out in 2 days' time, I'm going to be on the beach. So, and then I'll be able to not have this completely exhausting, depressing life. So, yeah, I do think that most of them want to go home, but there's an exception is there's 5 or 6 countries that are expected to win the World Cup. So almost always Brazil, France, Argentina, we can name them. And those players, for them, the nightmare is being knocked out because they will never be forgiven and will never. I
wonder also if in the globalized era, there's certainly from the South American teams, there is a kind of joy of just being together in a monolingual situation. When you're with your club and there's 15 different languages going on in the dressing room and so on, and you come back and you spend time with your own people. And Ancelotti's talking about this now. With Brazil coach, how pleased they seem to be, for quite a lot of European players. And Mascherano spoke about this when he was at Liverpool. He just couldn't believe, talking to his teammates, that for many of them, playing for the national team was a drag. But for him, it's an honour, and not only an honour, and obviously a lot of pressure, but also a pleasure. Just because you're with your own people, you're singing your own songs.
Yeah, at homecoming. I mean, I write about this for the Belgians, who mostly left Belgian football as teenagers. So for them, these are, because there's not much talent in Belgium. There's only about 15 guys who were good enough to nearly win a World Cup. So they'd all played together from the age of 15 or so. So they loved coming back together. But I think that's true of the kind of 3-day or 7-day meetings when often you're in a nice hotel. Security isn't insane. I mean, I went to the Argentinian team hotel in Qatar. It was a women's student residence at Qatar University. It looked like a bunker and it was protected by security and the players couldn't go outside. I mean, it was just dreadful. And, it'd be nice to see them all for 4 days, but a month. I think amazing for Argentina to have hung on and won the World Cup from such a terrible place. Whereas England, say, and I think Holland were in really nice hotels.
And Holland, I remember Holland in Brazil in 2014. Go out and roam the streets, lads. Go out. That lovely kind of Dutch liberalism, which I hope still exists despite everything.
Yeah, they still have that. And I think the Germans were in this kind of family kind of large hotel space. Everyone had their own bungalow, and I think sometimes the wives and children lived in the bungalows as well. And it was like a relaxed kind of long weekend with friends.
And what you will know better than anyone, that if the players find it grueling, a World Cup for a fan, and even more, I think, for a journo, the World Cups can be just unbelievably grueling, can't they?
Yeah, I'm jealous of the fans because often they come in for 2 days and it's the high points of their year, maybe of their lives in some cases, and they're just totally up for it. Whereas when I see them, we're all on the bus to the stadiums together. I've been doing this for 20 days. I've seen 16 games. It's the same for you. You know what it's like. I've been on 8 flights, being shouted at by security, got up at 5 a.m, and so on. And also, as a journalist, you watch a lot of games, you don't care who wins. So when it's Paraguay, Japan in Pretoria in 2010, and it's 5 degrees and it's 0-0, I just think, why is anybody watching this? But the fans, it's the best day of their lives.
Well, what about you? Why are you doing it? Is it just as a job, or is there some kind of innate, sadomasochism? Because it does seem like a chore. I haven't been to a World Cup. I've been to a couple of Euros, and I was on the verge of the World Cup when in '98 in France. To go with my father-in-law and a group of Jamaicans following the Reggae Boys. But anyway, it didn't happen as it was supposed to happen. It just fizzled out, unfortunately. Didn't get to the ticket stage. But the Euros I experienced was mad enough, and I can imagine the World Cup is amplified a couple of times.
Especially in a huge country like Brazil or Russia with, 5-hour flights, yeah.
Yeah, I wonder what, I do it because maybe I haven't done it as many times as you. I could imagine you, being told by your editor, look, Simon, do you fancy going to the next one? And, I would groan by the 9th or 10th one, but maybe not you.
I mean, part of me fears just the exhaustion, fears the jadedness that I sometimes feel. But I suppose there's also a kind of completist inside me, like Nick Hornby writes about people have with music. They have to go to every gig by the band, or Doncaster fans going across the country to watch a game they know they're going to lose 300 miles there, 300 miles back, because they just feel they have to do it. So that kind of crazy completism, and I have to say it's also economic. When there was still freelance football journalism, especially, the World Cup was my highest earning moment in the 4-year cycle. And then after that, I could chill for a few months, not worry too much about money, and spend my time shouting at the children.
Yeah, have you ever been satisfied after, at the end of a World Cup and thought, well, that was a month well spent?
Yeah, I do. I mean, am I feeling great? Am I feeling happy? Am I at my peak of physical fitness? Do I not want to sleep for the next 3 weeks? But yeah, Brazil 2014, Qatar was a weird one because, of course, it was Qatar and all the issues that we know about, but it was a very enjoyable World Cup as a football experience.
And no traveling.
Game, never flying, etc.
I remember from Brazil 2014, and it was just absolutely exhausting. Really was. And I remember after the final, I've done all done all my stuff, all my media, written all my articles, been in the stadium in Manakana, short ride home afterwards, and I just want to collapse. And then I remember, oh God, yeah, I've fixed up with BBC World Service to do a thing at one of the kiosks on the beach at Copacabana.
Oh gosh.
Right. So, I've only got, I can just have a quick nap for an hour or something. And then I've got to schlep over to Copacabana for this. And I really didn't want to. And I was so glad that I did. And I shall tell you why. Because it was still full of Argentina fans who just lost. But it was great. Everyone was up. And everyone was up for it. And everyone was having a party, including, especially the Argentina fans who just lost. And there was this feeling that while we don't go to bed, the World Cup is still happening. Yeah. When we wake up tomorrow, it's all history. So let's try and stretch out this euphoria for as long as we can. And I just love that. I thought that was great. And that reinvigorated me.
Well, you're also jaded about Copacabana, but I spent about 10 days there during the World Cup, and that was a highlight of my life. So,
I think what happens in Copacabana stays in Copacabana. If not, the kids would have things to shout at you for. You started this, I imagine, in 1990 with a love relationship.
Yeah,
I imagine, going in 1990 in the Italian stadiums and all the rest of it, and 32 years later on. In Qatar, you're older, wiser, sadder, more jaded, and it's no longer only a love relationship; it's a love-hate relationship as well. How has that gone over time, and what's the percentage now between love and hate?
I mean, as a journalist, it's hard to be as kind of wide-eyed about football. No matter your age, as soon as you become a journalist, there's this jadedness about football that creeps in because, like you, I've interviewed footballers and coaches, and mostly I think the ones I've met, nice people, and they're very incredibly good at what they do, just fantastically good at what they do. I admire them, but it's a job. It's a profession. There isn't much love for the club. There isn't this, I always get very annoyed when football fans talk about this player loves the club, that player doesn't love the club. I want to say none of them love the club. Don't be stupid. And so when you look behind the curtain and you see it's a job, a lot of the kind of dream of it vanishes immediately. And I have friends my age who still attach that dream to it.
Yeah.
I don't feel that anymore. I mean, I'd be very happy if Holland win the World Cup, but it's not a magical thing for me like it was when I was 20 years old.
The World Cup has this ability, though, to bring people together, and you touched on it in your first answer about the idea of people from all over the world buying into it because your country's being represented at a sport that we have all had a go at. We know what it's about. It's different from half of the sports in the Olympics. You're rooting your nation on just because they're your nation. Yeah. Whereas here, you understand the way your nation plays football, and it's kind of, can the way we play beat the way you play, despite what might be inequalities in so many different ways. And I do wonder how different the game is itself in a World Cup. Tournament football is different from domestic league football. First of all, domestic league, you're going to get a second chance to have a go at them later on in the season. In tournament football, once you get to the knockout stage, that's it. It's just like FA Cup finals, FA Cup finals, FA Cup. In which other ways would you define the way that football is played in World Cups against maybe the way it's played elsewhere? For example, the pressure that you mentioned the players are under, especially the England players, they have to play. We want to see them not playing defensive. And that happened in last World Cup. You might remember when they started going defensive. People, or was it in the Euros? People started going absolutely bananas and saying, why aren't you playing much more front? It was the Euros, forgive me. Are there particular ways that you've identified that the football in a World Cup is played?
Yeah. So what you say about national styles was very strong until about 2000. So the Dutch, the Italians, the Brazilians, the English, they all had their own style. And that was part of what you felt watching, that both the strengths and weaknesses of my country, Brazil or England, are being exhibited on the field in a way that goes beyond football. So with England, it's the warrior mentality, but also kind of lack of European sophistication. That's what people felt. And so the way the team plays is the way your country is. And now I think that's very largely gone. So England, Italy, Holland, I mean, how's to tell them apart? They all look quite similar. Spain look more like Holland than Holland do. Germany are more like Holland, but they always lose now. So those national styles have melted together, and Brazil was always sort of trying to hang on to something that I think was partly an idea of the past, and it hasn't worked. So Brazil missed the boat of modern football. And so you have to play this international style of massively fast passing, collective, everybody defends, everybody attacks, and it's all the same. The thing that's disappeared from World Cups. The things that are different are the drama, as you say, is just incommensurate. There's nothing in club football that will mean as much. It's not just you're playing a series of finals. This is, for most players, the most important tournament of their lives. I mean, less so, if you're playing for Liverpool and England, Real Madrid and Spain. But most of the guys, they play for countries like Ecuador, Japan, or Ireland. This is by far the biggest thing that they're going to tell their grandchildren about. So it means just so much. And the last thing I'll say is that the quality is now worse than good club football. So until about 2000, the best World Cup matches were the best matches in football. And in the 70s, when you saw new players, the 70s and 80s, who play like the Brazilian Josimar, who you may never have heard of, and suddenly saw this great player. That's all gone. So now with 32 teams, most teams are worse than Everton or Fulham. With 48 teams next year, that's going to be even more extreme. You're going to get teams in the World Cup that couldn't play in the English Championship. So it's not about the quality anymore. It's about the drama.
Josimar actually married my wife's cousin.
Oh, congratulations. That's very
no, there are no congratulations in order there. That was an absolute disaster. A disastrous decision. He wasn't built for the success that he so fleetingly enjoyed. The point about, because on football isn't folk dance, is it? There is a result at the end. You can prove that style A is better and more effective than style B, and so that alone, let alone the movement of players around the world, that leads to a kind of movement towards a loss of individual styles. But even like on the great Colombia side of the late 80s and early 90s, that Valderrama side, such a stereotypically South American side, it's full of Holland 74. So you've always got this crisscross of ideas. It's always happened. The one thing I think that makes me love the World Cup even more these days, perhaps, you can never love it in the way that you do when you're 9. Your first one, you can't. But just the fact that you can't buy players, there's no transfer window, because watching from the other side of the Atlantic, the sense of entitlement of English fans these days, that their clubs should be able to should be buying the best players in the world, and there's something wrong if that's not the case. I find that sense of entitlement a little bit off-putting, and the fact that with the national teams, sorry, you can't have Moses Caicedo. He's from Ecuador, and football is a low-scoring game. So if you get 11, 15 Ecuadorians together, this is a country that didn't make the World Cup till 2002. I was there the first time they qualified. What a party that was, and it was like them saying to the world, hey, we exist. Well, now maybe they can think not only, hey, we exist, but hey, we might be able to give these big sides a shout. So you get a different dynamic from the world, from club football, where you get more and more and more concentration. In the international game, you get a little bit less. Is that fair?
Yes, but it's still the Western European teams that dominate. So if you look at the teams that made the podium since 2006, I think that's 5 World Cups. It's all Western Europeans plus Croatia, which is next to Western Europe, plus Messi's Argentina. Nobody else. So the 180 countries in the world that are not in Western Europe, they have one team that can compete with the best Western Europeans, Messi's Argentina. And so even quite small European countries like Belgium, Croatia, Portugal, Holland are better than, even Iceland is probably better at times than China, India, or the US. So that success of Europe, or that domination of Europe that you're talking about, to some degree is replicated in World Cups. And even the successful teams from outside Europe, like Morocco.
Yeah, it's based on Europe, players formed in Europe, isn't it? Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. I've been a romantic fool yet again. I shall chastise myself.
I was going to point it out, but then I thought, no, why? There's no need to go there, Dotun. No, only kidding. But if we are looking at again, I'm really intrigued with the way the World Cups play out. What can we see about where it's going? Because if it's this marketing success, great marketing success, and yet it's taken out some of the value you're suggesting, the cultural value of the World Cup, and the teams are pretty much of a muchness in the way they play football and their styles. In fact, in the players, because they all play for the same team, they know each other, etc. It seems like the World Cup is sucking out some of the joy that it once had. So where does it end up? Does this trajectory continue where you're getting more and more and more teams in the World Cup just because it's so lucrative? And
does that amplify the joy as well?
Yeah, I mean, if you're Indonesian or Chinese or Iraqi, it's great that there are more chances to qualify. I mean, with all due respect, and don't take this the wrong way, I think we're all old men talking here.
Oh God, so, yeah. No, let's confess. There's no one's going to argue with that.
So yes, the World Cup has less joy because you're comparing it to when you were 8 years old and you remember these incredible things. But my sons won the World Cup because they're France supporters when they were 9 years old in 2018. I didn't really see any diminution of joy or meaning of World Cups. I don't see in their generation any diminution of what football means, or they don't seem to feel, they and their friends, that it's been spoiled by commerce or something. So I think that this kind of, it was better in my day, something, yes, we all feel that. Nothing for me will match the World Cup 1978 or 1982, which I watched on TV. But if I were 8 years old now, I wouldn't feel that.
What do you think about the fact, because now it's become so big, and this obviously means that fewer places can host it, or you get this, 2030, two sides of the Atlantic, and you look on, say, Brazil 14.
Yeah.
At some point, everyone came to Copacabana. Everyone who was there came to Copacabana, which is where you ran into everyone. The bigger it gets and the more spread out, you lose that focus, don't you? You lose the aspect of the world coming together in one place. How much of a problem do you see that?
Yeah, I don't see that problem. I mean, 2030, two of the countries co-hosting, Portugal and Morocco, I think would never have got a World Cup by themselves. So it's fantastic. You're Portuguese, you're Moroccan, you can have a World Cup in your country. And when you're there, a Scottish friend of mine was telling me, it was Scotland, Norway, 98, and we partied the whole night with the Norwegian fans, which is what almost every fan in the world will tell you about their World Cup experience. It's always true, but it happens every time they think it's unique.
Yeah. Well, mine's Croatians. Sorry. Go on.
Yeah, you and the Croatians. And you'll still have that. So the place you're in, the bar you're in, will feel like the center of the world the night you were at the World Cup, whether it's in Brazil or Morocco.
Yeah, by the way, I do totally accept your point about us being senior citizens in terms of World Cups.
Me too. I put my hand up immediately.
Yeah, no, all of us. Yeah, totally. But I wasn't suggesting that the World Cups are not watchable, or I'm comparing them to the great World Cups I saw, because you can put on as many matches as you like. You can have as many teams World Cups you like, and I will watch all the matches. I'm not going to turn down the opportunity to watch.
Shut up, Costa Rica's on.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to watch everything anyway. But I can see the World Cup being so much of a product competing, let's say, with the Olympics, that it's kind of like just watching it for the sake of it, rather than again, let me go back to 1966. We've already stressed we're old men. No need to repeat that, for goodness sake. But I'm the oldest of the lot, clearly. I remember so well the landscape around the World Cup, because it was here in this country, in England. When I say I'm the only one here in England at the moment, but I remember all the World Cup willies. I remember the euphoria, and even though I was 6 years old, I remember there was a buzz in the air. I'm not sure if the World Cup comes here. Oh, it will be euphoric. Don't get me wrong, but I'm not sure if when it comes here, it will be something that will be a unique experience. I'm not sure.
I'm sure it will be. The comparison of the Olympics, I think, is interesting, because the last Olympics, it's when I can have a little holiday. It's the only time I can have a little holiday, really. And I was in Greece, and I was in England a little bit, but obviously my social media has a lot of Brazil feed. And the thing that really, really struck me was there's no one Olympics. No. Every country sees a different Olympics, and no one else has any interest in, we've just come third in the double sculls rowing, whatever. No one watches it. So every country, and the Olympics has gone more and more and more like that since my first one, which was 72. The World Cup, everyone is seeing the same images. Yeah. And obviously, go on, Simon.
No, finish. Go on.
Yeah, obviously there are different national perspectives on the narratives that are happening, but everyone is seeing the same images and basically the same storylines.
Yeah.
So it's always going to have a power, and the more countries involved, although we can criticize it and think it's an exaggeration, it may be, I don't know, but it just means that there are more people involved in the same narratives. Whereas in the Olympics, it fractions into little micro. There's almost nothing in the Olympics that everyone sees, that everyone takes, with the exception of the athletics and some of the swimming, maybe. What else? What else does the whole planet watch?
And people don't care about the sports as much. I mean, I went to quite a lot of events at the Paris Olympics with my family because we live in Paris, could get tickets cheaply. And you sit there, watching the archery or even the tennis. And most people don't really care that much. And they're taking selfies and they're dancing and they're not emotionally involved. Whereas World Cup football match, everybody watches for, 98 minutes and people go mad about it.
We're emotional.
And I finally made more sense of it towards at the end of my book. I go to this church near Marble Arch and I interview the vicar, who's a guy called Lincoln Harvey, who's written about football. And he says, you got to understand what the World Cup is. It's a kind of religious feast, like Easter, like Eid, like Hanukkah, but that the whole world is invited in. So we all, whether you're Nigerian or New Zealander or Norwegian, you're all invited, you all care. And as you say, you all discuss the same stories. And we're on this kind of equality. We're one planet, but we also care about our nation. So it's a festival of the nation and a festival of the world at the same time. And that's just beautiful and brilliant. And that it brings us all together.
So we found the love. We have scraped through the level upon level of jaded journo in Simon Kuper. And we have found the 8-year-old kid at the heart of this story.
But let's
feel that 8-year-old kid when I watch Holland at the World Cup. Not often, but sometimes. Yeah.
But I'm looking at the time, and I don't want to end this conversation without doing a comparative study to a certain extent of the 9 games that form your journey. First question, though, I get a feeling, just going back onto the love bit, as you said that, I thought, how much more joy there is on the streets, in the landscape, when the World Cup is on. Even if it's not in your own country, there's a sense that people are being entertained somewhere, or they're going to parties, which are kind of World Cup parties just for the sake of it. It's a summer tournament generally, and people are having barbecues just for the sake of it, inviting people around. And let's watch the England game. You go to a bar, for example, and the bar's full. It's almost as if everything around it, for those of us who aren't there at the tournament, is also a kind of a landscape of joy. In the early stages, sorry, final thing. This is the punchline. In the early stages, in the group stages, when you're seeing loads of matches and the jeopardy of not winning the World Cup isn't as imminent, there's joy. It kind of just dies when your home team gets knocked out.
It's not that people are devastated that their team is knocked out, but what's really important is what you described, the party, the communal party. So when England play a World Cup match, about half the population watches. It's the biggest communal event we have. It's much bigger than the Queen's Christmas speech, which used to be the biggest TV program of the year, which nobody watches anymore.
I used to phone my dad up every year at exactly that time.
Queen's Christmas speech.
Up his Christmas dinner.
He never realised that I was doing it on purpose. Never realised.
Well, people genuinely watch that, but now they watch World Cups. And in Soccernomics, Stefan Szymanski and I show that suicides fall in a country whose team is playing in a World Cup because of that togetherness. Because lonely people get dragged into that kind of life you're talking about. They can come to the pub, they can talk to somebody at work or at the bus stop about, did you see that last night? And so it's this fantastic party. And the day your team is knocked out, it's not that you think, oh my God, my team is out of the World Cup, I can't bear it. It's that you lose that bond with everyone around you.
Yeah. The most important thing for me about the human being is that we're a social being. We're a social animal. It's the most important fact that our friends on the extreme right seem to, the neoliberal right anyway, just seems to want to forget all the time. But that's what it is. It's a festival of collectivity, isn't it? The World Cup. One thing makes me dubious about it. I hate nations. I hate nationalism, and obviously it's a festival of nationalism. So I get dubious.
I genuinely. I mean, honestly, I've heard
what kind of nation? I suppose it becomes the question. Who belongs to the nation?
It's not about nationalism. It's about affiliation, I think.
Yeah.
That's why I can engage with the Croatian fans, because they're not saying we are better than you. They're not, Tim. I mean, some people might do, but most of the fans, apologies, but most of the fans are there just thinking, hey, you're here and all. Oh my goodness, what's it like in your country? Right. Oh my goodness, you must come and visit me when you come over here. Can I come to your country? Most of the fans that I've come across in football tournaments are like that. They're not nationalistic.
And a lot of people, I think most people in the world are actually not supporting their own country. So I was at one of the Brazil games in Qatar, and the stadium was full of Indians from India and around the Gulf in Brazil shirts. So, as you know, Brazil has the strongest following of people not from their nation, people thinking of 1970. So Indians supporting Brazil, Israelis supporting Brazil, Palestinians supporting Brazil, Indonesians supporting Germany. That's part of what a World Cup is.
And there's a huge Bangladesh-Argentina connection.
Oh,
massive.
Right.
Yeah, massive.
That's beautiful. I mean, where else would those two nations find out?
What I always see is, the few white people that are amongst the Nigerians or amongst the Jamaicans. Jamaicans get a lot of Europeans, and Jamaica's a multicultural country, so they could be from Jamaica, but you get a sense, nah, you're too well fed to be from Jamaica or whatever. And it feels like, people love the Jamaican colours and have been inspired by the likes of Usain Bolt or the Reggae Boys or the Reggae Girls indeed, and have absorbed that as their support, it's their second team kind of thing.
Yeah, I know a bunch of Jamaican guys who go to every World Cup to support Brazil. So that's another,
That's true, but why not? And we made the connection the other day. Alan Skinny Cole died, and he was the first Jamaican to be signed to a Brazilian club, linked with Bob Marley, etc. So that might be where the roots are from. Bob Marley, certainly, he would wear a Brazil shirt any day of the week. I mean, he loved the way that Brazil played football, and he saw it in the way that you sometimes see it, Tim, as a kind of a metaphor for life and the world. Look, man, Earth is round, just like a football. Yeah, that's Bob Marley all over, man.
In all of your wanderings, what's been the World Cup high point and the World Cup low point?
I mean, I look back at all my old notebooks and I wrote definitively 2014, this is the best World Cup. And I wrote it from a swimming pool in Brasilia, or after Holland had beaten Mexico in the last minute. So that was just brilliant. And then I think maybe the Kakagawa Grand Hotel in Kakagawa, Japan. I don't want to malign the hotel. It's a perfectly normal hotel. But I thought, where the hell am I? How did I get here? Why does every hotel look the same? That Paul Simon song, Homeward Bound, and each town looks the same to me, the movies and the factories. In Japan, that was a million times over. And that's the kind of most alienated I've ever felt in my life.
Yeah, I can feel that. So of all the World Cups that you've been to then, which is the one that perhaps, not that you've enjoyed the most, but the experience was the best as a World Cup experience? What's the perfect World Cup? You hinted that the Qatar World Cup, for the football, certainly was. I mean, it depends what you're going for, doesn't it? But also, maybe it's a question of being pragmatic, that, the best World Cup doesn't necessarily give you the best football, but sometimes gives you the best atmosphere, or vice versa. You know what I mean?
I mean, the best World Cup was, for me, Brazil. And it's partly because you had Brazilians who are very nice to be around. I live in Paris. Everyone feels very nice to be around whenever I go abroad. And also they have beaches, and it was summer, unlike in South Africa. Well, it wasn't summer, but it was a lot warmer than in South Africa, the previous World Cup. So Brazil was just the best World Cup. You need a host country that really cares. So Brazil had that. Germany had that. Almost no other World Cup I've been to had that. Italy, I guess. Most, whether it's the French, the Japanese, the Qataris, it just passes them by. They don't care. And that's a problem. And just Qatar was pragmatically the best, because you could go to 2 games a day and sleep in the same bed every night. And just for a journalist having, in Brazil, okay, I'm at the stadium now. How do I get to the airport? Will they let my suitcase, out of the stadium, etc.? And then I've got a 5-hour flight, and then I have to write 2 pieces when I land. That kind of, how the hell do I survive this feeling in Qatar was not a problem. This is very selfish, but that's how I felt for me.
Sure. Final question from me, at least. Where will you be for the Donald Trump World Cup?
Well, it's in the hands of the Financial Times, this almighty institution on which I've been dependent for 30 years. And they've sent me to every World Cup since 94 was actually the first time I ever wrote for the FT, because I happen to already be living in Boston. So I'm hoping every time that they'll send me. I'm never sure until it happens. But here, our fingers crossed, I will be there. And I would rather spend the first couple of weeks in Mexico, a country I've never been to and I'm deeply curious about.
You like Mexico. The people are amazing. I was there last year. I'd been there before when I lived in California many moons ago, but didn't really live with Mexicans until last year. They were amazing.
See, I want to wait now for the next version of this book.
Of course,
which includes your experience in Trump Town.
Yeah, well, my plan is every World Cup I update it. So, the World Cup 2058, you'll get a new edition.
I'll be around for that. I'll definitely be around for that one. Can't wait.
You'll be so excited by then, you won't even be watching.
Oh, yes, I will. Oh, yes, I will. Simon, it's been amazing, man. And generally, just to echo what Tim said there, the 10th, may your 10th World Cup be everything you expect it to be. And if I can join you in Mexico, I certainly would. Not bothered about the rest of the United States part of it, but Mexican football fans, who would want to be there? Who would want to be there?
Send me an email and we'll watch Iraq, Costa Rica on TV together first.
That'll end up being the best game of the tournament. You watch. Mate, thank you very much, Simon Kuper. Remember, the book is World Cup Fever, and goodness knows the fever will come upon us soon. And it is the story of his 9 tournaments, the journey in 9 tournaments, a footballing journey indeed. Tim, thanks very much. Thank you. Well, amazing, Simon. Let's do it again anytime you like.
Absolutely. Lovely to speak to both of you.
Cheers.
Get in touch with the Brazilian Shirt Name Podcast on Twitter at BrazilShirtPod, or you can email us brazilianshirtnamepod@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, rate and tell a friend. The Brazilian Shirt Name Podcast is an 1129 production.